Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Intan Kurnianingsih. My official number is A1M2-19008. Welcome to our video, and we are from Group 2, and the material is 3 approaches to language behavior. In this opportunity, I will explain about the linguistic approach, the field of linguistics, unit of linguistic analysis, morphology, and syntax. Okay, let's start with the linguistic approach. In linguistics, there are several kinds of approaches, namely traditional linguistic approaches and structural linguistic approaches. The first is traditional linguistic approach. Traditional linguistics has survived hundreds of years of linguistic studies. Traditional linguistic assumptions in studying language can be stated as follows. Language studies are based on the study of philosophy. Language studies start from written language. Language must be correct according to the rules. Traditional linguistics has successfully described the scope of language studies, including phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. The second is structural linguistic approach. The language identification based on structural linguistics, which is considered as an important result of linguistics, is the language dichotomy theory. This means that language can be dichotomized in pairs. Okay? The next material is the field of linguistics. The field of linguistics is divided into two, namely microlinguistics and macrolinguistics. The first is microlinguistics. Microlinguistics is the field of linguistics that studies language in a narrow sense, namely language in its position as an independent natural phenomenon. Microlinguistics study language material directly about its properties, structure, work methods, and so on. Microlinguistics is divided into two, namely general microlinguistics and microlinguistics for certain languages. Microlinguistics is general, consisting of phonology, morphology, semantics, and syntax. Microlinguistics for certain languages, consisting of descriptive linguistics, structural linguistics, historical linguistics, comparative linguistics, comparative historical linguistics, diachronic linguistics, synchronous linguistics, and concentrative linguistics. The second is macrolinguistics. Macrolinguistics is the field of linguistics that studies language in relation to factors outside of language, such as psychological, social, teaching, medical, and philosophy. External studies are divided into two fields, namely the interdisciplinary field and the applied field. The interdisciplinary field is a joint study of two disciplines, namely language studies and other studies. Consists of phonetics, psycholinguistics, anthropological linguistics, ethnographic linguistics, sociological linguistics, neurolinguistics, philology, stylistics, philosophy of language, epigraphy, paleography, and semiotics. The applied field is a study that seeks to study language to be applied to other words. Included in the applied field are medical linguistics, educational linguistics, forensic linguistics, lexicography, translation, sociolinguistics, crepology, language teaching, mechanolinguistics, language development, medical linguistics, and phonetics. Okay, the next material is units of linguistic analysis. Linguistic description is carried out in terms of certain fundamental units which can be isolated by analytic procedures. The two key units are: the first is morpheme. A morpheme is the smallest syntactical and meaningful linguistic unit that contains a word or an element of the word, such as the use of s, whereas this unit is not divisible further into smaller syntactical parts. There are two types of morphemes, which are free morpheme and bound morpheme. The free morpheme is just a simple word that has a single morpheme, thus it is free and can occur independently. For instance, in David wishes to go there, go is a free morpheme. By contrast to a free morpheme, a bound morpheme is used with a free morpheme to construct a complete word, as it cannot stand independently. For example, in the farmer wants to kill duckling. The bound morphemes er, s, and ling cannot stand on their own. They need free morphemes of farm, want, and duck to give meanings. And the second is phoneme. A phoneme is the smallest unit of sound in a word that makes a difference in its pronunciation, as well as its meaning from another word. For instance, the s in soar distinguishes it from in roar, as it becomes different from soar in pronunciation as well as meaning. Okay, the next material are morphology and syntax. Morphology and syntax are an integral part of linguistics. They are subdivisions of the study of languages, and together with phonetics, semantics, and phonology contribute to the understanding of how a language is formed. Morphology deals with the understanding of how words are formed, while syntax is focused on the way sentences are developed. Basically, morphology is the study of the structure of words, while syntax studies the structure of sentences. Together, these disciplines help linguists understand how language works. Morphology helps linguists understand the structure of words by putting together morphemes. A morpheme is the smallest grammatical, meaningful part of language. There are two different types of morphemes that form the basis of the words they structure. They are known as a free morpheme and a bound morpheme. A free morpheme is a single meaningful unit of a word that can stand alone in the language. Syntax looks at sentences and how words perform in a sentence. Syntax looks at the rules and process of building a sentence, and it looks at the word order and structure of a sentence. The meaning of a sentence in any language depends on the syntax and order of the words, with a verb and a direct object. Okay, I think that's all from me, and the next material will be explained by my friend. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And hello everyone. My name is Ladebul Jakaria. My student registration number is A1M219O10. In this video, I would like to explain to you about the linguistic approach. My friends has already explained three parts in linguistic approach. So I just will explain three parts that remains. So check this out. So the linguistic approach, as distinct from psychology, which is concerned with verbal behavior in the context of events occurring within the organism, and from the other social science, its orientation tends to be social rather than individual, since the use of speech in communication presuppose a group of intercommunicating people, a speech community. In general, therefore, it has dealt with the speech of individuals merely as representative of the speech of a community. The next part, um, precisely the fourth part, is about the problem of meaning. The problem of meaning in linguistics. Besides specifying meaningful units and their construction, a complete linguistic description must state the meaning of these units and of the construction into which they enter. Difficulties about the meanings of words are often too many philosophical problems and disagreement. We can reduce these difficulties by clarifying and specifying the meanings of the words we use. But some words can be hard to define, especially words of particular interest to philosophers like truth, reality, consciousness, and justice. Indeed, it's often said that these words are indefinable in principle. The next is about historical linguistics. Historical linguistics, it's the study of not only the history of language, as the name implies, but also the study of how languages change and how languages are related to one another. It might seem at first that this would be a rather dull, uneventful field of study, but that is far from the truth. However, historical linguistics is full of lively debate and controversy. And occasionally, some nasty words are thrown around. The main job of historical linguistics is to learn how languages are related. Generally, languages can be shown to be related by having a large number of words in common that we are not borrow. Languages often borrow words from each other, but these are usually not too difficult to tell apart from other words. When a related group of languages has been studied in enough detail, it is possible to know almost exactly how much words, sounds, and even grammar rules have changed in the languages. You might be wondering why languages change. Historical language change is distinctly human. As society and knowledge shift and grow, so does the communication. It change. Historical linguistic studies the nature and causes of language change. The causes of language change find their roots in the psychological and cognitive makeup of human beings. Sounds change usually involve articulatory simplification, as in the most common type, assimilation. Analogy and reanalysis are particularly important factors in morphological change. Language content resulting in borrowing is another important source of language change. And the next is about Typological comparison. Typological comparison studies about language according to their structural features. Its aim is to describe and explain the common properties and the structural diversity of the word's diversity. The, the ascertaining of historical relationship and the reconstruction of process of change is not the only possible motive for the comparison of language. We can examine the language of the world, com- comparing both related and unrelated ones. And in order to discover language universals, the greater than change occurrence of certain rates and the significant tendencies of traits to cluster in the same languages. The problems of typology are of intimate concern to psycholinguistic, the universal or more than change occurrence of certain traits is in need of correlation with our psychological knowledge. More data on languages in many parts of the world and some effort at cross-linguistic cataloging are probably necessary prerequisites for any considerable advance in this area. In Indonesia, we know that we have many languages, every tribes, every area. So we can look how the sounds of the language, the grammatical and the change of the language in our area. So that's all my explanation about the linguistic approach, the problem of meaning in linguistic, historical linguistic, and typological comparison. I apologize if in my explanation that has a grammatical error. Thanks for your attention and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
The next material, there is the learning theory approach.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Mutia Alvina, and in this video, I would like to explain to you all about the learning theory approach. Language is perhaps the most complex behavior displayed by the human organism, and in the main, it is learned behavior. It is understandable, therefore, that linguists should find learning theory of special interest. Although linguists have for many years refrained from psychologizing within their science, it now appears that more interaction between psychologists and linguists would be fruitful. At the present time, probably more experimental work is being done in learning than in any other psychological field. Now, I would like to explain the first material of learning theory approach. There is phenomena of learning. In order to discuss the phenomena of learning most meaningfully and fruitfully, there's two paradigms. In the phenomena of learning, now in this section, now I would like to explain to you all there are two types of learning method. There is classical conditioning and instrumental learning. Here, in phenomena of learning, there is two learning method. The first one is classical conditioning. Classical conditioning involves learning the relations between stimuli. In its simplest form, a natural stimulus precedes a stimulus that can be called the unconditioned stimulus, or US. Then the unconditioned response or UR. Learning is indexed by the development of a response, or we can call it the conditioned response or CR, to the natural stimulus, which is now the conditioned stimulus or CS. The interval between the one set of the CS and the one set of US is called the interstimulus interval or ISI. Stimuli that can become CS may be discrete or more intextual, and they need not even be external. Response to stimuli, CRs and URs, may be simple as an eye blink or more complex, such as approach and withdrawal. Originally thought to be due is simply to contiguity between the CS and US. Modern conceptions of learning in classical conditioning emphasize that the CS must provide information about US and that the CR is both elicited by the CS and anticipate the US. The next learning method, there is instrumental learning. Instrumental learning is the second method that I would like to explain. This model considered here is markedly different from the classical conditioning. It has been called variously trial and error learning, operant and instrumental conditioning, and descends more directly perhaps from the work of Thorndike. In instrumental conditioning, learning trials typically involve a response by individual followed by a reward or reinforcement. The reinforcement often involves the presentation of something good, such as grain to a hungry pigeon. Alternatively, reinforcement may involve determination or prevention of something bad, such as the cessation of a loud noise. That's all my material that I explain in this section. The next material will be explained by my friend. Thank you for watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nuratria Sabah. My rank number is A1M219-016. Today I will explain three topics. The first is learning theories. The second is several nature of psychological theories. And the last is current theories of learning. So let's move to the first topic about learning theories. Since theory is a somewhat ambiguous word, it seems advisable to outline briefly the conceptual framework which the seminar utilized in its discussion of learning theories. And the second is about general nature of psychological theories. Contains the concepts which are the special concerns of the sense, like the stimulus, the phoneme, and energy, and laws which are summaries of their observed relation or hypothesis predicting relation not yet observed. Level 3 leads directly to an hypothesis on level 2 by means of translation of term indicated by the interpretation into the laws of hypothesis of level 2 are summaries of observed or predicted level 1 event. Because of these relations between the levels of a theory, let's move to three current theories of learning. The first theory is of Guthrie's association theory. Guthrie makes extensive use of movements produces stimulation as the actual stimulus file to which the responses are associated. Motivation and reward have no primary status in Guthrie system. They operate only as they affect the central principle. And second theories of Tolman's Zeitgestalt theory is most significantly, perhaps Tolman insists that what is learning is not movement or responses by significant expectation. The organism learns meanings and what leads to what assigned and its significant and early stabilized in accord in the usual contiguity rules of associations, and this relation is the extension. And the last is theory of Hall's deductive system. This system consists of the basic set of postulates from which it is hoped the laws of learning may be deduced in clear and quality forms. The system seems is most directly from Western's behaviorism and Horndike's connectionism. Step by step, Hull's postulates describe the process of learning as follows. Part 1. Stimuli impinge on the organism and generate natural activity which persists for some time before disappearing. Part 2. Complex stimuli intend in the nervous system to produce modified stimulus patterns. Part 3. Organisms have innate general responses which are set in action by needs, withdrawal from pain, general movement, and locomotion when hungry, and so on. Part 4. When a stimulus trace and a response occur in close contiguity and at the same time need is reduced, increment is added to the habit range of the particular stimulus response pair. Part 5. Stimuli which are similar avoid the same response, and the amount of generalization is a function of stimuli in terms of just noticeable differences of a commonly used form of a measurement in psychology of sensation. Part 6. Derives have stimulus properties, and the intensity of drive stimulus increases with intensity of drive. 7. Recreation potential is products of habit, strength, and drive. Part 8, 9, and 10. Reaction potential to be effective must be greater than the resistances to response relative inhibition of similar to fatigue, conditioned inhibition, learning not responding, and the oscillating inhibitory potential associated with the reactions potential. And part 11, if the momentary effective reaction potential is above, the reaction is halt and stronger the response will occur. So that's my explanation about learning theories, general natural psychological theories, and some theories of learning. Thank you very much. I close it with say Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rizka Utengkudiarti. My reg number is A1 M2 19 0 and 20. Well, I will explain about the information theory approach. The first topic is some applications of information theory. Two main classes of application of entropy measures were indicated briefly in section 2, 3, and 2. At this point, new symbols for sets of states will be substituted for the general ing symbols in order to more sharply distinguish the measure used in these two types of situation. A. Conditional relations between systems. In many cases, we are interested in describing the degree to which events in one antecedent system influence even in another subsequent system to which it is directly or indirectly coupled. We may symbolize the class of events in the antecedent system as I, input, and the class of events, the subsequent system, as O, output. Normally, our studies involving measurement of information transmission have closely followed the familiar communication channel model developed by Shannon. The states of the input are usually simple stimuli such as alternative light patterns or spoken commands. The experimental subjects are treated as communication channels and their response to the alternative stimuli are treated as output states. B. Transitional relations within systems. In other cases, we are interested in describing the extent to which antecedent events in a system influence subsequent events in the same system. We may symbolize the class of antecedent events as A and the class of subsequent events as S. Here S indicates the degree to which on the average particular subsequent events are independent of particular antecedent events, the degree of randomness in the sequence. The next topic is some limiting considerations. Information theory concepts and measures are particularly liable to misinterpretation and misapplication. It is necessary to draw a sharp distinction between information in this sense and its common referential sense. We commonly regard a message as informative only if it has some dependable relation to events outside of the message. An informative message is so because it is indicative of some other state of affairs. Distinction made above may be clarified by considering the following example. Suppose that a mechanical oracle has been constructed which answers any inquiry with set of randomly selected words such that the choice of words is independent of the inquiry and any previously selected words. Another frequent misconception probably stems from the term information theory. As the previous discussion has indicated, the chief contribution made by this theory to the study of language is a set of descriptive measures and a unit, the bit, which are much more broadly applicable than to language processes themselves. Two limitations of a statistical nature must also be mentioned. In the first place, these entropy measures are as yet of little value in hypothesis testing and statistical inference. This is because so little is known about their sampling distribution. However, a recent paper by Miller and Meadow provides a valuable initial step in the derivation of these distributions. It is also possible to test hypotheses concerning the probabilities on which the entropy measures are based by using the known chi-square test. Okay, thank you. I think enough from me. More and less, please forgive. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.